Hello there and welcome to our Sage Business Cloud Payroll webinar, Set Up Your Payroll. My name's Duncan. I'm your host and presenter for this session, which should take us approximately 1 hour. Now, just before we get started, I did want to run through a quick bit of housekeeping with you. So we'll just start by explaining how you can ask questions during the webinar today. So if you take a look towards the right-hand side of your screen, you will notice there's a little question mark icon, which will open up the Q&A panel. So if you type any questions into there, our staff at this end will send you a typed response. Now, we also have available to you some handouts. So if you'd like a copy of the slides or some useful links, you can access them from the little documents icon. If you have a microphone, it is muted automatically throughout this session. And to get a closer look at some of the demos, you do have an option of switching to full screen at the bottom of that control panel. So we're going to take a look at what I'm going to cover in the webinar. So we'll begin with an introduction to Sage Business Cloud Payroll, listing some of the key features and benefits, explaining how to access the software, and also giving you a checklist of what you'll need to get started. We're then going to move on to setting up your payroll. And the way that you do this will depend on whether you're a brand new business, employing staff for the first time, or whether you're moving an existing payroll over to Sage. So we'll look at the key steps involved. We'll give you a video demo on setting up a new payroll. We'll then look at how to migrate an existing payroll to Sage, either manually or by using the FPS import feature. We'll take a look at pension setup and some of the additional setup steps, and that should get you to the position where you'll be ready to run your first payroll, produce your pay slips in your new Sage software. And we'll also stick around at the end of the webinar to host a Q&A where we'll continue to answer your questions submitted in the Q&A panel. Now, if you have already set up your payroll, you may be interested in our other webinar to learn how to process your payroll. It's available to sign up for on our website, and you can follow the link on the slide, which of course you can download as part of the handouts. So do check that one out if you haven't already done so. So let's crack on with our introduction. So first thing I'll do is I'll just run you through some of the key features and benefits of Sage Business Cloud Payroll. So as the name suggests, it is cloud-based. So some great news there. There's nothing that you need to install at payroll year end or any other time. We will always keep the software up to date with the latest features included. You can access it anywhere from any device with an internet connection. So that could be a PC, a Mac, a tablet, or even a mobile device. You can set up online payslips and host your employee payslips in a secure online portal, eliminating the need to print out or email the documents to them. You have some auto enrollment and pensions features, which will ensure that anyone that meets the criteria to be automatically enrolled is put into your pension scheme. And you've got some integration with Sage Accounting. So if you have Sage Business Cloud Accounting, your payroll information will post automatically into your accounts. A recent feature we've introduced is the ability to set up additional payroll users, and we'll show you how that works later on in the demo. And with Sage Payroll, you have 24/7 access to our help and support, including a telephone helpline, and we'll give you more info on the help and support as we go through the product tour. So those are just some of the key features that I've picked out. The other thing I wanted to mention that is unique really to Sage Business Cloud Payroll. You can't do this so easily on our desktop products, but you're in complete control of your subscription, and you have the option of logging in at any time to change that to subscription to meet your business needs. So we offer payroll starting from 5 employees all the way up to 100 employees these days. So as your business changes, you can increase the number of employees you need, or in fact decrease the employees so that you're only paying for what you need to use. So you can access these options from Manage Business Account, and I will point that out when we go through the product tour. So here is how you access Sage Payroll. It's all done in a browser. There's no special software you need to install. So just head to our website, www.sage.com. You'll find the login option in the top right-hand corner, and then you choose Sage Business Cloud, Accounting, and Payroll. And then you would sign in by entering your email address and password, and you would click the login option. So we're going to take a look and give you a quick product tour. So if I just bring up Business Cloud, here is a payroll that is already set up. So this is a position that we aim to get you to following the steps in today's webinar. And you'll see that it's really simple to navigate with just a few menu options running across the top of the screen. So we are starting on the payroll summary, where this is showing us our next pay runs. So we have a monthly pay run due on the 24th of September. It's telling us about our upcoming RTI submissions. So we've got a month-end submission to do within 28 days and an FPS due today. And we've got a section which tells us about our auto enrolment and pensions and tells us if we're up to date with our pension submissions. I'll give you a quick look at the other areas. So pay runs is where you would come to actually process your payroll. And you can also access any historical periods that you've completed in Sage just by clicking on the relevant pay date in this list. You can manage your employee records, creating new employees, checking and editing the details from the Employees tab. And in the Pensions tab, you'll find details of your pension schemes that you've set up, including reports where you can view pension contributions to date, and you can generate any correspondence that may be required involved in automatic enrolment. You've then got the year-end options that you'll be running at the end of the tax year. And you can also open this drop-down list and look at previous tax years if you've completed them in Sage. So that would include a final EPS submission, and closer to the time you'll see options to produce P60s. There are a range of reports that you can run after completing a pay run. And then we have the settings area. And we're going to explore some of these settings in more detail a little bit later on in the webinar. Okay, so that was how to access Sage Payroll and find your way around. And what we're going to take a look at next is a checklist of information that you're going to need when you actually come to set up your payroll software. So the details you'll need do slightly differ depending on the scenario, whether you're creating a new company, taking on employees for the first time, you're setting up an existing payroll at the start of the tax year, or you're moving an existing payroll over mid-tax year, which is probably the most common option for people moving to Sage. So the type of information you'll need will include your employer details. That's your employer PAYE reference and accounts office reference. You'll need the user ID and password that you log into PAYE online services. You'll also need to know your reporting frequency and payment method when making payments to HMRC. If you're moving mid-tax year, you'll need to know your last completed reporting period, that's a tax month or tax quarter, and also details of any employment allowance that you have claimed during the current tax year. From the employee side, you'll need your employee's personal details, including name, address, date of birth, gender, and national insurance number. And if you're a new company, you'll need a P45 or P46, now known as a starter checklist, which will be used to set up that new employment record. If you're moving over to Sage, you will need your pay, tax, and national insurance details for the current tax year for what you've paid your employees so far, which you can get on P11 reports. And you would also need your RTI Pay ID if available from your previous software. In terms of pension details, you'll need information from your provider, including references, groups and payment sources, etc. You'll need to know the employee and employer contribution details, the calculation basis, so whether that is worked out on qualifying earnings or specific elements of pay, and also how the tax relief works for your pension scheme. And we'll be showing you the full setup steps for setting up a pension later on in the webinar. So let's move on now and show you the steps involved in actually setting up Sage Payroll. And I'm going to start with an overview of the 4 key areas that we're going to complete as part of the setup process. So first thing you'll do is enter some employer details, including that PAYE reference and accounts office reference that I mentioned earlier. You would then set up your payday calendar, confirming the dates that your employees will be paid. You'll enter employee details, or in some cases you will import them from your previous software, and you'll also need to set up your pension scheme, so that's ready to make deductions on your first pay run. And those 4 steps are the same regardless of whether you're setting up a brand new business, whether you're setting up at the start of a tax year or even mid-tax year. But if you are bringing a payroll over mid-tax year, you do have some other steps to complete, and that would involve entering opening balances, both for the employee in terms of their year-to-date information, and also some employer opening balances for any employment allowance or statutory payments that you've recovered. And you'll see as we go through the demos, we've got some handy wizards that will help you to enter this information. And when it comes to employees, you can even import year-to-date information if you're using our Import Employees feature. So let's just cover off the employer details first. When you add payroll to your subscription, you will have been asked for some of this information. So the PAYE reference, accounts office reference, your reporting frequency to HMRC, and how you pay them. But if you need to enter or check those details, you just need to head to your payroll settings from the settings tab at the top, and then click on Manage Payroll Settings, and that will then display the information. So it's important that you've got that entered correctly, as they will be needed when you make submissions to HMRC, and it's also validated if you will be importing your employee information. So we can tick off that first step. That's our payroll settings entered. Next thing we'll need to do is to choose an option from the Welcome to Payroll wizard, which will help us to set up our pay calendars and our employees. And you will be presented with 3 options at this point, and they are to manually migrate existing employee information, to import existing employees from previous software, or to create a new payroll company from scratch. So we are going to explore each of those options in more detail in the webinar today, but they will all involve similar steps of setting up the pay calendar and setting up the employees. So we're going to start with the most straightforward option, setting up a new payroll. And this option is suitable if you're a new business taking on your first employees, or if you're migrating existing payroll, but you're doing that at the start of the tax year. With this option, you'll be entering all employee details manually, but there are no opening balances required because you'll be at the start of the tax year and you'll be completing your payroll from that point. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play you a short video demo, which will take you through some of the steps in the new company option. I'm then going to come back and recap those steps, and then we'll move on to moving to Sage Payroll in the next demos. In this demo, I'll show you how to set up your payroll if you're a new company taking on your first employee. Starting from the Summary tab, click New Company. You now have 2 steps to complete. You'll need to set up employee paydays and then add your employees to payroll. To set up the paydays, click the link. This opens the Payday Calendar settings, where you can set up weekly, monthly, 2-weekly or 4-weekly calendars. For this demo, we'll set up a monthly calendar. You'll need to choose the day of the month that you pay your employees, which can either be the same day each month or the last day of the month. We'll choose the same day of the month, in this case the 25th, and then confirm our first pay run, which will be October. We can also choose to avoid public holidays and weekends, so if the 25th falls on a weekend or bank holiday, payroll will use the previous working day as the pay date. To save the calendar, click Save. If you need to make changes, go to Manage Frequency, then click Edit Paydays. Or to delete the calendar, click Remove Frequency. You can set up weekly, 2-weekly or 4-weekly calendars in the same way, choosing a day of the week as your pay date and then confirming the date of your first pay run. When you've finished, to check your upcoming pay dates, click View Pay Calendar. The Payday calendar is now set up, but if you need to get back to this screen, you can go to Settings and then Payday Settings. We'll return to the summary and go back to New Company. We're now ready to add our employees to payroll. Click the link to add your employees. Then to enter your employees' details, click Create Employee. We'll start with the employee's personal details and contact details. Make sure that you enter their full name, correct date of birth and national insurance number, and provide at least 2 address lines. Scroll down, then enter employment details, including pay cycle, start date and payment method, and directorship details if they're a director. In previous tax details, choose the starting basis. There are options for existing employees, or for new employees with either a P45 or a P46, also known as a starter checklist. In this demo, we're taking on a new employee, and as we don't have their P45, we'll choose P46. We can then choose the circumstances from the declaration on their starter checklist. There's an explanation of each declaration shown on the right. Choose the relevant national insurance category. And once all the information's entered, click Save to create your first employee record. You'd then repeat these steps for any other employees you need to add to your payroll. Once you've set up your employees, you can return to the summary. Here you can see your payroll summary, confirming the next pay run and HMRC submissions. You can also enter your auto-enrolment and pension details and record your employment allowance claim before you process your first pay run. Okay, so that video demo took you through the process of setting up a new company, and we completed 2 of the key steps in that, setting up a payday calendar, where we chose either a weekly, monthly, 2-weekly or 4-weekly calendar. You just need to confirm the day of the week or month that your employees are paid, and when your first pay run will be in Sage. And then you can view your pay calendar to check the pay dates for the current tax year. The other thing that we covered in that video demo was creating employees. So as you saw, there were personal and contact details that needed to be entered. Always enter them accurately and don't use any abbreviations for names. We then went through some of the employment details and directorship details. And what wasn't mentioned in the video was really the pay document preferences. So these are the options for sending payslips and P60s to your employee. So you can set them up to be emailed, where you'd be prompted for an email address and a password to protect those documents, or you can opt to print your payslips and P60s, which you'll be able to do onto plain paper. And then finally, you selected the starting basis, which for a brand new employee would be their P45 or P46, also known as a starter checklist. Or if you were moving over a payroll at the start of the year and didn't need any opening balances, you would choose the existing employee option when you set up the employee. So we went with that option first because it's the most simple and it gives you a good look at pay calendars and employee details. But what we're going to focus on next is actually moving an existing payroll over to Sage. So going back to that welcome wizard, if you move into Sage Payroll, there are two options available to you. So the first one listed is called Manually Migrate, and this allows you to move from another payroll provider partway through a tax year by entering all of your employee details and their opening balances manually. And there's a wizard in the software, which you'll see in the next video demo that takes you through that process. So I'm just going to play you the next video demo, and after this, we're going to see how you could save time by importing the employee details. But we'll play the video, give you a quick recap, and if you do have any questions, please remember you could submit them via our Q&A panel. In this demo, I'll show you how to set up your payroll if you're moving from another provider and want to enter the details manually. Starting from the Summary tab, choose the Manually Migrate option. This takes you to the Add Payroll Data screen, where there are 3 steps to complete. You'll need to set up a calendar, set up your employees, and then confirm the details. In the first step, you'll need to confirm your P32 reporting frequency and payment method, and the last completed reporting period from your previous payroll software. For this demo, we're moving to Sage Payroll in October, so we'll choose month 6 as the last completed reporting period. You can then set up your payday calendar. In this example, we have monthly paid employees, paid on the 25th day of the month, and will avoid public holidays and weekends. To set up your employees, click Next, and then click Add Employee. Enter the employee's name and their personal details and contact details. You can then enter their tax details. Make sure you enter the original start date and the tax code, NI category, and RTI Pay ID from your previous payroll software. As they've been paid in the current tax year, we'll also need to enter opening balances. This includes taxable pay, tax paid, and national insurance details. You can get this information from P11 or similar reports in your previous payroll software. We'll select Paid this tax year and then enter the PAYE details and NIC details. When you've done this, scroll down and, if required, enter directorship details, statutory payments such as maternity, adoption or paternity pay, and student loan repayments. If the employee started employment with you in the current tax year, you'll also need to enter their P45 or P46 details. When you've finished, just click Save. You can then repeat this for any other employees you need to set up. It's important to note that to save the details you've entered, you must complete the confirmation step. If you navigate away from this screen, you'll lose any information you've entered so far. So to save the employee I've just set up, I'll click Next. Then to confirm the details, click Submit. You'll then see the next steps, which include entering any statutory pay recovery and employment allowance values, confirming your employee's working patterns, entering current absences, and setting up student loan deductions. You can click the links in each step to go to the relevant area in Payroll. For now, I'll click Done, which takes us back to the payroll summary. To add further employees or to review the information you've entered, click the link to review, edit, or further configure your migrated data. Then click Review or Edit your migrated data, which takes you back to the Add Payroll Data screen. When you've finished, you can go back to the payroll summary to check your next pay run and HMRC submissions. You can also enter your auto-enrolment and pension details and record your employment allowance claim before you process your first pay run. Okay, so that was another video demo of the process to manually set up an existing payroll that you're bringing across partway through the tax year. And important note in that video was if you're going to be completing that wizard, you do need to click on the confirmation step to save the information that you've entered. So even if you haven't finished with all of your employees, if you want to take a break or anything, do confirm the details you've entered so far so that you don't end up losing any information. Now, I did want to just expand briefly on the opening balances and where you might find the information if you're going to enter it manually. So we did mention P11 reports in the video, which look something like this. These are the P11 reports from the Sage desktop payroll products. And you'll find the totals on the P11 reports can be used to fill in both the PAYE details and the NIC details, national insurance details. But you also get columns for statutory payments if these have been paid to the employee. So further down that page, if you do need to enter statutory payments or student loan deductions, they should also be on these P11 reports or any equivalent reports that your payroll software has. As well as the employee opening balances, some of the next steps mentioned entering employer values. So you would need to do this if you have recovered any statutory payments during the tax year. So that would be maternity, adoption, paternity, parental, or bereavement pay. And you would find that information on your P32 report from the previous software. And you would also need to enter any employment allowance claimed in the tax year, even if you've claimed it all, so that Sage Payroll knows how much allowance has been used and whether or not you need to continue claiming that later on in the year. And we'll show you those screens in a live demo a little bit later on in the webinar. So we've covered both of the manual entry options. We've used video demos for those because we could sort of fade to the completed screens rather than sitting and typing in the information. But what I want to show you next is a way that you can import your employee information and their opening balances by using what's known as an FPS file from your previous software. So an FPS is a full payment submission that is sent to HMRC each time you run a payroll, and it actually contains most of the information that you would need to create an employee record, plus all of the year-to-date values up to that point in the tax year. So if you are able to export your FPS file for the most recent period in your old payroll, that's a really handy way of creating the employee records and setting up Sage Payroll here in Business Cloud. And if you are moving from a Sage desktop payroll product, you'd actually find the FPS export option from the FPS viewer. So if you can find that in your previous software, scroll to the bottom of the list, you will find your most recent FPS file, which should hopefully save you a bit of time. So for this one, I'm actually going to give you a live demo on this one. So as you can see here, I'm at the Welcome to Payroll wizard. I've already been into my payroll settings, which I'll just show you now, to enter my PAYE reference and accounts office reference. So you need to do that before you import any information. But just heading back to the summary, I'm going to choose this middle option to import my existing employees. So there's a bit of information on how to do this and what exactly an FPS file is. So we'll just go ahead and click Next. And we then have the section where we can either browse or drag and drop our FPS exported from the previous software. So I'm going to click to browse to it. I've put it on my desktop. There was an FPS for month 6. As you can see, that has now been validated. System's happy with that, so all of the references match. And if I click onto Next, it will then show me the employee details that are included in this file. So these will be used to set up the employee records, but there will also be the opening balances for their year-to-dates. If you were switching at the start of a tax year and you didn't need the year-to-date values, you can tick this box to bring in only the employee details. But in this case, we do want to bring in the opening balances as well, and we've left these 2 employees selected. If I click on to confirm and then complete import, you'll see at the bottom of this screen, I have successfully imported the employees, and then we can review the information that has been imported and we can complete a checklist to get everything else set up. So some of the items on this checklist should now look familiar, setting up paydays, for example, and then asking you to check opening balances. They'll be entering employer values as part of this process and also setting up employer pensions. And that's something that we're going to cover separately later on in the webinar. In this checklist, you can follow any of the links to move to the relevant area of Sage Payroll. So I'm going to quickly set up paydays for this payroll. It will be a monthly payroll where employees are paid on the same day of each month, that day being the 25th. And we're going to start using Sage Business Cloud in October. So that's my payday calendar set up. And if I then navigate back to the payroll summary, we can then tick that step off of the checklist and we can start working our way through the other steps. Now, I just want to point something out at this point. We have got a warning that our employees require attention. And the reason for this is not all of the information is automatically imported from an FPS file. So what we would need to do is to edit these employees. Well, we can see there's a status where the RTI issue requires attention. So if we select our first employee, it tells us that the start date is required. So all we then need to do is to edit this record, and then we can scroll down and we can enter the start date like so. So you will need to know what each of your employees' original start date was. And what you can also do at this point, if you want to, is to complete the missing address details, which also are not included in an FPS file. So once we've got that start date entered, I can click on to save, and I will just enter a start date for the other employee as well. Both happen to start on the 1st of January 2020 in this example. And there we can see that the RTI warnings have now been removed. So other things that we'll need to do is to check opening balances. If applicable, if they started with your company after the beginning of the tax year, you need to enter previous employment values, and we can enter things like statutory pay recovery and employment allowance. So when it comes to these employer values, I'm just going to click on the link for statutory pay recovery. We need to indicate if we qualified for small employers relief. And then if you take a look at a P32 report from your previous software, and I happen to have one just here, I've run that for month 1 to 6 from my previous payroll, and you can see these are the amounts I've recovered for the tax year to date. So I could type those in along with the NI compensation. And then the other thing, because I'm claiming employment allowance, is to migrate my employment allowance values. So again, from the P32, I can pick up this value. I have to type it in manually. And I can save that screen. So you can find these from the settings. They're also part of the checklist if you've used the import option. And you would work through these other areas. You could check the opening balances. I'll just show you that they imported. So for the first employee here, I click on opening balances. These have come through automatically as part of the FPS, as well as the statutory pay in this case. So we can check that. We can check working patterns. Obviously, work your way through this checklist, ticking off the various steps. So we'll end that part of the demo just there. And just jump back to the slides. So that was the import option. You can also get to this through settings. So if you've already sort of completed a setup wizard, but you have further employees you need to import, so that could be your weekly payroll if you've already imported the monthly. You can go to settings and you can import employees from there. And then as we've just seen, there's a checklist which will help you create your payday calendar, check the employee details, enter anything that's missing, such as start dates, addresses, or P45 details, migrate your employer values, and then the final 2 steps are all around setting up your pension. And that's what I'm going to cover in the next part of the webinar. So auto enrolment and pensions is now part of the payroll world. It was new legislation that came in back in 2012. It started to take effect, and now all businesses are required to ensure that eligible employees are put into a pension scheme and that they're making contributions towards it. So as part of your setup process, you will need to enter your pension scheme details. And then when you run your first pay run in Sage, anyone that should be in a pension scheme will be assigned to the pension scheme that you've set up. So 3 steps I'm going to take you through in the next demo. We're going to enter a duty start date or staging date. We've then got a preparation checklist that we can quickly work through. And then in step 3, I'm going to add some pension details. So I'm going to point out some of the key settings there to get right so that pension deductions have been made correctly. So I'll just jump out of the slides again. And the first thing I need to do before we can set up the employer pension is to confirm our staging date. Now for this payroll, because they started relatively recently, their staging date was the date they took on their first employee, which in this example was the 1st of January 2020. I'm going to save that as the staging date. And it then confirms that we have already reached that date. So we have got some preparations we need to complete, which we will do right now. So we can either follow this link to prepare for auto enrolment, or we can click on the pensions tab at the top of the screen. And then there are 4 steps to work through. So the first is to confirm that you've nominated a contact with the pensions regulator. If you haven't and you want to do that, you can complete the contact form following this link. that you're aware that you need to assess your workforce to identify who needs to be put into a pension scheme. And the software is going to do that automatically on your first pay run. So we're going to go ahead and tick that. And then the third step is to review our pension arrangements. And this is where we're going to add our pension details. Now, if you are a brand new business and you haven't yet set up a pension scheme, you can actually follow some links down here, which will take you to some of the providers that are set up to take on small businesses and help them set up a pension scheme. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add my existing pension. So I'll say that I do have an existing one. I'm going to click Add a New Pension, and then I can choose from the 4 pension providers that were named on the previous step. Or if I'm not with one of these 4 providers, I can use this option to add my own pension. So I'll just click on to Nest in this example. So we have a pension scheme with Nest, and I just need to fill in an employer reference. And then for Nest, we need to set up at least one group and one payment source. And these are the settings that will determine how the pension contribution is taken. So if I click on to Add Group, first thing I need to do is to enter my group name. So if you are with Nest, you will have set up a group on the Nest online portal. And it is really important that you enter the name of that group in exactly the same format. So using the same case and any spaces. Your contribution rates will be percentages in most cases. And then for the contributions for the employee and employer, by default, it'll be set to the legal minimum, which is 3% for employer, 5% for employee. But you can change this setting if you need to for your scheme. Now, the next section is to define what earnings are pensionable. So there are 2 main settings here. You can apply to pensionable pay, where you can choose specific pay elements that would be used in pension contributions or pension calculations. Or you can apply to qualifying earnings, which will then work out pension on all earnings between a lower and upper threshold. So you'll need to check with your pension provider if you're not sure what your earnings basis is. Commonly, it is qualifying earnings with Nest schemes, so that's what I've chosen in this scenario. You then have the tax relief setting. So if the pension should be taken before tax, you would tick the box. But if you have a relief at source tax relief arrangement, you'll need to make deductions after tax and leave that box cleared. If you're unsure, always check with the pension provider. And in this case, I am taking the contribution after tax, so I'm not going to tick the box. And then we can confirm our payment due date, which we've agreed will be the 22nd of each month. And this is going to be our default pension plan. So that's the group setup, exactly matching the settings on my Nest online portal. I'm going to do the same for my payment source, which is just a case of entering the source name in the correct format. Then I can tick a box, agreeing to the terms, and I've already ticked the qualifying scheme box to confirm that I can use this for auto-enrolment. So let's just save the pension settings. I can then tick off that step. It will offer us some letters that we can print for our employees. So if we were a brand new business taking on employees for the first time, we'd probably want to print these letters because it explains to them how auto-enrolment will affect them. So upcoming pension changes. So that's like an introduction to auto-enrolment, which could be sent to the employees. But we're going to mark this as employees already informed, because we'd have done that back in 2020 when our duties first began. So if I head back to the summary, I can then tick off the final 2 steps here in my checklist. And we can see that the auto-enrolment and pensions is now set up. And we can review, edit or add new pension schemes just by navigating back to this pensions area. So you've just seen the 3 steps that I worked through there, and setting up the pension. We chose our provider, entered references, and in our case it was groups and sources, which are the settings used to calculate the contributions, and that was the setup that I used. But you should always clarify this with your pension provider if you're at all unsure. Right, so we're nearly ready to run our first pay run, and we actually cover how to do that in our other webinar, Process Your Payroll. But I do want to run through some additional setup briefly, including employment allowance, if you're claiming that, and also make you aware of the new multi-user functionality that we've recently introduced into Business Cloud Payroll. So a quick intro to employment allowance. This is a government scheme that allows eligible employers to claim up to £4,000 per tax year by reducing their employer NI contributions when recording payments to HMRC. So there is some qualifying criteria which you can check on the gov.uk website, but if you are eligible to claim the employment allowance, you will need to record this in your payroll software and submit a claim at the start of each tax year that you're eligible. So this will be one of your setup steps if you're using Sage Payroll for the first time. So I'm going to give you a quick demo on how to record an employment allowance claim. It's pretty straightforward. So looking here at the payroll summary, under the real-time information section, we have got the option to record our employment allowance claim. So if I click onto that, all you need to do is to confirm the industry sector that applies to your business. And to give you a clue, if it's not agriculture, fisheries or road transport, you will fall in the industrial category. And then you need to make a submission to HMRC. So this is where you'll need your HMRC credentials, so the user ID and password that you use to sign into PAYE online. So I'm just going to enter some details for this demo. And as you can see, it is possible to store these credentials for future submissions, which I'd strongly recommend that you do. And if you then click on to submit, that submission is now in progress. And once it's been received by HMRC, that's your claim recorded. And then at the end of each tax period, so tax month or tax quarter, depending on your reporting frequency, you will be able to claim back any remaining employment allowance. And the P32 report in Sage Payroll will work that out for you. So very quick demo there. There's a link to our help on employment allowance. That's also available in the handout. And this is just a look at the P32 report that you'd run at the end of a tax period. And you get your employment allowance summary at the bottom, confirming anything that's being carried forward or anything that's been claimed. That's why it's really important to enter employment allowance details in the Migrate Employer Values section. So last thing I'm going to show you in the demo, as this just came in recently, it's the new user management feature, which allows you to set up additional users to go in and manage your payroll. So if you're a slightly larger business or you have other people that you're going to get to run the payroll for you, you can invite them as a user. Now in Sage Business Cloud, you can give them either full access or no access to payroll. So if you also use our accounting, you can have accounting users that don't have access to payroll. But you will need to be an owner or a system manager with full access in order to add an additional user. So I quickly want to show you where you set that all up. So in the settings, and I'm logged in as the owner at the moment, if I go to my settings, under personalization, we have a new user management option. So this is my main user, this is the owner, system manager, which means I will be able to invite users, you would need to enter their email address, and they'll receive an email inviting them to our payroll. Just pop some details in. You can choose whether to make them a system manager or not, but system managers do get full access to both accounting and payroll. And then we can assign our access to the payroll advanced permissions, which in this case, we could set as full. So if you click on to save, the user is then invited, and they can then log in and access your payroll, run the payroll under their own login details. So it's been quite a popular feature requested. So that is now available and works, as I say, in a similar way to additional users in accounting. Right, so three other things I'd just like to mention at this point. I'm not going to demo them because we do go into them in more detail in our processing webinar. But within the payroll settings, before you run your first pay run, you may want to select an alternative template for your employees' payslips. There are three to choose from. You could set up online payslips, and there's a great video link to in our handout, which explain exactly how that works. And you can, in advance of your first payroll, set up your payments and deductions so that they're available to select for your employees. So three other areas you might want to explore before you run your first payroll, but we do cover that in more depth in our processing webinar. So that actually brings us to the end of what I'm going to cover in the webinar today, but I do want to let you know about the further support we have available, which includes some free interactive training through Sage University. So I've already mentioned this, but we do have other webinars available. There's one on processing your payroll, and there's another one, a new one specifically on migrating data from instant payroll. So if you do want to sign up to any of those webinars, and we will have on-demand versions coming soon, just head to our website. The link is on screen, and you will be able to sign up for them. Sage University is your next port of call for free interactive Sage Payroll training. So you can see just a flavour of what's available in these training courses. They're getting some great feedback at the moment as well, and I've put a direct link to this learning path on the screen. All you would need to do is to create a Sage U login, which you can do for free, and you can access all of this training to learn at your own pace with interactive tutorials, etc. The Help Center is available in Sage Payroll. You'll find a help icon at the top of the screen. So do check that out to search for any help topics you might be interested in, or to navigate using the options on the left-hand side. And whilst you're in the Help Center, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll find the various contact options available, which include online chat, telephone, or email. And our telephone line is available 24/7 to help you out when you need that. So we do have a little bit of time left in the webinar. So we are going to stick around to answer any remaining questions, which you can submit using the question mark icon on the right-hand side of your screen. Don't forget to download any handouts that you might want as well at this point, as we will be closing the webinar shortly. If you are leaving now, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you found the session useful, and please do look out for a follow-up email, which will include a link to a recording and also a feedback survey. I look forward to seeing you at some other webinars if you are leaving now, but if you're sticking around for questions, please continue to send them through via the Q&A panel on the right-hand side. I'm going to go on mute for now, but I will come back to say goodbye as we close the webinar. Okay, so we are now out of time. Thanks once again for joining us today. Do get yourself signed up for our other webinars and check out sageu.com for the free interactive training. Please stay safe out there and look forward to seeing you at another webinar soon.